We're going to go just a little bit further today in Mark chapter 14, and we're going to get down into, fact is, we're going to go ahead and skip over, at least to the large degree. There was the what we might call communion, the Lord's Supper, the various words for that, phrases that we use to describe Jesus sharing the bread and the wine or juice with the disciples, directly following our previous Bible study. And then we get down to verse number 27, and Jesus begins to indicate to them that not all is well. Obviously, Judas has already gone, but now you have Peter, and he's saying, at least Peter took it personally, everybody's going to be offended by me or of me this night. And basically, nobody's going to stay with me, and everybody's going to forsake me, and all those things. Peter was offended, and he said, everybody else might, but not me. Maybe that's why we're a little bit hard on Peter when we start looking here, and not just here in Mark 14, but other places as well, that we start to discover, or at least feel a little bit of that reproach toward Peter. Peter, you made so many boasts and claims of what you would do, and then when the real trouble came, you weren't anywhere to be found, at least not in a good way. And so anyway, Jesus had kind of warned him, and then in verse 30 it says that even this very night, before the cock crow twice, thou shalt deny me thrice, or 3 times. And so then Peter made it even a more bold statement, more vehemently. He said, even if I have to die with you, I'm not going to deny you. Somehow, Lord, you're just wrong about that. There's no way that would ever happen to me. Now, that sounds a lot different than our previous Bible study that said, is it I? Is it I? You know, who can be sure as to who is going to last? And now Peter's saying, well, it sure is going to be me. I will be there with you the whole way. I'm not sure exactly what all took place in between there, but somehow Peter got his boldness again. So then they went into the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus is very sorrowful. And it even says in verse 34, my soul is exceeding sorrowful unto death. Tarry ye here and watch. He took Peter and James and John with him. Verse 33 give us their names there. And then he began to pray. We could spend a lot of time, and some of you may be listening to this that you haven't been part of our congregation maybe ever before. Some of you only know us through the videos. But I have covered this numbers of times, and I think maybe even not so long ago, this whole issue of Jesus dealing with it in the Garden of Gethsemane, and how he felt such the weight on him. It wasn't that he was sinning. He was carrying the sins of the whole world, but he hadn't sinned. And there was nothing wrong with him desiring his own preferences, in a sense, but he had to surrender it. And again, I don't want to get into all that. I've focused on that a good bit. I think probably if you search a little bit, you could even find a message along those lines, even on the channel. But what I do want to notice is that in spite of all of what to us we might say would be failure in the disciples, they couldn't watch with him. They couldn't stay awake. They apparently weren't praying like they should have been, or like Jesus had wanted them to. And yet Jesus in verse 38 makes a compassionate statement, could I say? A generous statement. He said in verse 38, watch ye and pray, lest ye enter into temptation. The spirit truly is ready, but the flesh is weak. And that's really what I want to kind of get to for this Bible study today, is that Jesus knows our humanity. And Jesus knows when we want to do right. He knows when we're trying to do right. He knows when we mean well. We want to please him. We want him to be supported by us and our church and our group. All those things. We want those things. And yet sometimes it just seems like we fail so miserably. And we feel like, Lord, I'm trying. I try to overcome, and then sometimes it seems like I fail. I try to pray like you'd like for me to pray, but I fell asleep. I don't do very good at this. I struggle sometimes. I'm not trying to make allowances for us to just live any old way we please. If you've listened very long, you know I'm not like that. I believe we serve a holy God. He demands that we are careful. However, we also serve a loving God, and He knows when we mean right. We're trying our best. We want to please Him. We want to stay with Him and support Him in all of God's plan. But He also knows that we are human. And sometimes there's just a need for a reminder of that as good as we do at times, then sometimes, like the disciples, we fall asleep or we fail to come through like God would want us to. There have been a number of examples like that. Obviously, one that we never want to deal with, I'll say it that way maybe, or that we never like to confront is if we fail in temptation. But there are other times, and maybe it's that we failed to witness when we had a chance. We failed to notice that one who was hurting. We failed to say it right, to offer encouragement. Just there's a whole realm of things. And sometimes we might feel like, Lord, I'm trying. I want to do the right thing. I want you to be pleased with me. I want to be able to exalt your name and build up your kingdom. And yet, the spirit's willing, but the flesh is weak. I just don't seem to have the answers. I don't have the way forward. And so for today anyway, I want us just to remember that the same Jesus who said this to the disciples says it to you and to me. I know your humanity. I know when you struggle. I know when you want to help. You want to step up. You want to be faithful. And yet your flesh gets in the way. And you are weary in well-doing. And you are discouraged. Maybe sometimes you do struggle in the load. And yet he says, I know about that. And he cared for these disciples. I know maybe in some ways we'd say that, well, he was sort of reprimanding them. And he was, probably to some extent. But he also was saying, I do understand. I know that you don't understand what I'm going through. I know that you don't know what's coming. Their eyes were sort of blinded, though he had tried to tell them. And so anyway, right here, he's saying, I do understand. And so maybe even today, we could just remember that Jesus understands. And he calls to you, as the song says, come to me and rest. Leave the unknown future in the Father's hand. Whether sad or joyful, Jesus understands. I'm glad that he does understand our weakness and our frailties, and yet he does want us to stand with him. Pray more, be more faithful, witness more, whatever you can for God, but also recognize that when sometimes all of our good intentions didn't quite come out right, that he understands. And I'm glad that we serve a God that's compassionate and caring even in those times. Well, God bless you until we meet again, and continue to follow after Christ, walk in his steps, and do all that he'd have you to do the best that you humanly can.